A month after the Warwick sit-in, students at Liverpool University occupied their Senate House. Ex-student Jerry Corden, now a retired lecturer, took me back to the site.
So this is the old front door of the Senate House. It's now padlocked up. It's just a back entrance to the library. These would be the doors through which 300 or so of us poured in on that afternoon to start the occupation, up that short flight of steps.
And then you streamed up to, well, some of you went up to the roof and hoisted the red flag.
Hoisted a red flag, yes. This circular construction on the side of the building is the old Senate chamber, where the University Senate, the main decision-making body, would meet. And that was where we held our mass meetings during the time of the occupation.
You chose the good building in a way to occupy because it did have a room suitable for mass meetings.
Absolutely, yes. It was perfect.
The Liverpool students suspected that their university too was keeping secret files on them and demanded to see them. But their main demand was the resignation of the university's Chancellor, Lord Salisbury. Pete Cresswell, now a social worker, is another veteran of the occupation.
The motivation for most of us was the university's intransigent attitude over racism and the character of Lord Salisbury, the sort of person who shouldn't have been anywhere near a higher education institution. He was a caricature, really, of a Victorian imperialist.
Ian Williams, now a journalist.
He was way to the right. He was a member of the Monday Club. He was on the record as supporting apartheid and often made profoundly racist statements about the capability of blacks for self-rule. The idea that somebody this profoundly reactionary should be representing the university was a bit too much. It really was.
Another of the occupiers was John Snow, now presenter of Channel 4 News.
I felt that the tacit support for apartheid was completely unacceptable, and that the university also clearly had investments in South Africa. We felt it was wrong to have any association whatever with apartheid South Africa, and we also felt that there should be student representation on the bodies that made decisions like where the money was going to end up, where it was going to be invested and the rest of it. And they felt we were there for a transitory moment and that we should have no rights in terms of running the university.
In the Liverpool University Student Union elections that year, one candidate campaigned for more medium-sized meeting rooms, while the socialist candidate demanded the overthrow of capitalism, starting with its servants in the university. He lost the election, but matters came to a head when the union invited Lord Salisbury to its annual dinner and dance.
The Students' Union president was basically fired because he and the lady president, as we had then, were presenting bouquets and welcoming Lord Salisbury.
We took exception to that, occupied the Students' Union and said he couldn't come in. And he asked us to go down to the Adelphi Hotel to meet him, so half a dozen of us went down. And one of our number was an African postgraduate, and Lord Salisbury refused to engage with him. He just peered over his half-moon glasses, looked at all the rest of us and said, in his cut-glass accent, "Can't understand a word he's saying, can't understand a thing he's saying."
The Vice-Chancellor was invited to explain himself to the Students' Union, particularly on the question of the university's alleged South African investments.
A mass meeting was held and we felt that the answers from the Vice-Chancellor were totally unsatisfactory. So, and then the decision was taken to occupy the Senate House.
I was a pink liberal, and I think I was seen as a sort of respectable face in some ways. I was on the Student Union Executive, and it did indeed fall to me to call upon everybody to occupy the building. So I was at the head of the crocodile that steamed from the Students' Union over to this block to occupy.
My joking title was Commissar for Security. I was in charge of security. Several of the occupants still resent after 40 years that I stopped people smoking dope on the premises.
The registrar came in via his normal route, which was in the basement of the Senate House and the car park. Our guards must have been asleep, complete dereliction of duty really. And the registrar got in. I saw this happen from one end of the corridor, and I stood across a staircase and wouldn't move.
I was in negotiation with the security people, and at one point, for example, they switched off the heating. I pointed out that the people, especially in the basement, were very cold, and they're going to bring in leaky paraffin stoves. And, why leaky paraffin stoves? They're the only ones they can afford. And he said, well, you can't do that. There's a computer down there. I said, I know, that's why I thought I'd tell you. The heating was on within 10 minutes of the conversation finishing.
Every night we held a mass meeting to discuss policy for the next day.
It was very ideological and very divided. I mean, lots of ideologies in play and lots of people vying for supremacy. But we had the one common purpose of wanting to grind the noses of the university authorities into the dust.
We had teach-ins on all sorts of subjects. We had one on Palestine and the Middle East. We had sort of nature of love, and, we had music. We even had parlour games, sort of pin the tail on the donkey.
I remember a theatre group came in and a film group. At the weekends, we turned the adjacent Abercrombie Square Gardens into People's Park and opened it up. We made posters. Some very vibrant poster art emerged on a par, I think, with the posters that came out of Paris in May '68.
How much were you consciously following in the footsteps of the 1968 Paris students? Did you see yourself as
I think
part
very
of the movement?
I think very much so, yes. It was very much influential. And I think there's another thing that you need to remember, that if you were on the left at that time, and particularly the Marxist left, there was a lot of debate that was going on, and some Marxists were actually proposing that students were the revolutionary class. They were the vanguard of the revolution. And this was very controversial because, of course, it contravened the idea of the proletariat, the working class, as the revolutionary class.
When it was all over, the university's Socialist Society published a paper called Mistakes of the Occupation. It lamented the lack of political indoctrination during the occupation and the failure to raise political consciousness among students. The central function of the university, it said, was ideological mystification, whereby the nature of class society was emasculated. One of the socialist protesters was David Robertson, now yet another professor, this time of public policy at Liverpool's John Moores University.
There were those amongst us who saw the university as an agent of capitalism, that capitalism was itself intrinsically evil, that all had to be replaced by a heroically socialist state, the proletariat had to run that state, and the universities were simply in the way of all that happening. Looking back, fantasy language, fantasy demands, and a little bit embarrassing when we laugh and recall how some of us took that view.
And their politics let them down.
We sort of made a fatal mistake. The janitor, Mr. Jones, I believe his name was, lived on the premises. So, we were very, very friendly terms with him. We sort of let him in and out, and his wife were up there, and we were, very amicable terms. And we liaised with the university's chief of security, Mr. Pugh.
Mr. Pugh, well, that was a mistake, because he ended up spying on us and telling the university administration who we all were. And we were suitably naive at that point. We assumed that the workers were on our side. Well, the workers weren't.
False consciousness.
False consciousness indeed, absolutely, yes. Betrayed by the mystification of the university employer.
Unfortunately, the Easter vacation came upon us rather faster than we wanted. And, of course, with the ending of term, these committed revolutionaries began to drift off and want to go home. And it got to a point where the sit-in was unsustainable. And we closed it down before it became completely fatuous, cleaned up the building and left, and were then arrested.
Arrested?
Well, arrested by the university authorities, yeah. Picked off. Not frog-marched anywhere, but definitely collared and warned that we would be prosecuted.
And how did that work, the disciplinary hearings? What actually happened?
Well, it was a model of a kangaroo court. 7 professorial staff. They were represented by a QC, and we were represented by nobody.
Conduct detrimental to the discharge of the duties of the university. That was the charge that we all faced. I had another charge, I can't remember the wording of, which related to the incident with the registrar.
And the verdict in your case was?
Oh, guilty as charged on all counts, I think.
And the sentence?
I was expelled.
You were the only one expelled?
I was the only one expelled, yeah.
Then there was Pete Cresswell's stunt when the verdict was announced.
It was a toy gun that I fired it at the panel.
What happened?
Well, one of them did duck under the table. They did comment on it afterwards. I think any chance I had of getting off disappeared at that point, really.
The authorities in Liverpool really believed they had a serious revolutionary cell on their hands, and they needed to teach us a lesson on behalf of the United Kingdom. It was a very reactionary, extremely scared institution, and they came down on us with all the power they could wield.
One person, Pete Cresswell, was actually expelled permanently. You felt that was a particular injustice?
Well, I thought the whole bloody thing was a terrible injustice, absolutely no question. I mean, it was absolutely outrageous to send any of us down, that a liberal institution should have responded to our very reasoned complaints in the way they did. They never engaged with us on any level. They never had any discussions with us. The sit-in was a last-ditch determination to try to get them to listen to us.
Several hundred students had taken part in the protest, but only 10 were disciplined. They appealed and lost.
All the other students drifted away, and Ian Williams and I were left working as bus conductors, basically. And after that, I got a job as a hospital porter, moving dead bodies, and did that for a couple of years until I became a social worker. When I did my social work training, I did get a place on a course at the university, and I have to say it didn't occur to me that they would even remember me. But although I was accepted on the course, once you got to the ears of the powers that be, they rejected me. So expulsion was for life, actually, which was I certainly didn't appreciate that at the time.
John Snow chose not to go back, but pursued a high-profile media career.
They very sweetly wrote to me on the 100th anniversary of the founding of the university and said, we'd like to give you some kind of an honorary degree. And I wrote back and said, well, I'm not a graduate of any sort, and was sent down, and I feel as aggrieved today as I did then. But B, as there were only two of us who didn't actually get degrees, me and Pete Cresswell, I think he should have an honorary degree as well, and then all is going to be happy.
What did they say?
I never heard any more.
So you haven't got an honorary degree?
No, I haven't, no.
Keele, Warwick and Liverpool were just three of the universities that had protests. Essex, Sussex, Lancaster, Bristol and others saw similar problems. And to judge by a satirical song on That's Life, the public weren't too keen on student protest.
We have lots of lovely banners on the issues of the day. Like give power to the people right away, yay, yay. And there's down with city planners, and there's up the IRA. And let's drop a bomb or two upon the lousy USA.
Maybe it's not surprising that the university administrators didn't see how society was changing. Michael Shattuck from Warwick.
Frankly, universities were not very good at dealing with it. They thought they were in loco parentis, that they had disciplinary powers which were really no longer appropriate for dealing with 18-year-olds. They were very slow to react.
When I'm asked out to a party, then I toe the party line. And anyone who disagrees is just a fascist swine.
We were right.
And they were wrong.
We were right.
We were right.
They were wrong, basically.
Rah, rah, rah for the British University.
Looking back at it now, we can see that the university was on the wrong side of history, if you like.
Well, yes and no. You were on the wrong side of the history in that you were imagining this was a precursor to the collapse of capitalism and the establishment of a socialist state, which we're still waiting for.
Yes, I probably felt that, events like this would ultimately culminate in the collapse of capitalism. I don't know, but there does seem to be a sense of seriousness and genuine questioning of the world outside the university in the Liverpool events.
I tell you frankly, if we had students today who took themselves as seriously as we did then, who were as engaged with social issues as we were then, most academics would give their eye teeth for a group of students like that. The trouble is, in many cases, not all of course, students don't take anything very seriously anymore.